Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk.
All right, hello, and welcome to the second episode of Season 3.
Season 3. Yay. Today, why don't you introduce her since she's your daughter? We have a guest.
We do. We have a very special guest who came up with she came up with the theme for the episode. She came up with the title of the episode. And I'm happy to say she is graduated from college, employed, and about to move out. You know her as Thing 2. What would you like to say about yourself, Nikki?
Well, my name is Nikki Partlow-Loyall. I'm all that stuff that she just said. I just graduated college. I'm moving soon. I have a degree in history as well as a degree in political science. And yeah, I came up with the whole theme of this episode because I wanted to talk about one thing that I really like learning about.
Cannibalism?
Well, no, specifically the Donner Party.
Okay.
Uh-huh. And everybody out there's going, yep, she's MB's child.
Because that was clearly the only thing that made it obvious that I am your kid. Not the fact that we have the exact same laugh or anything.
No.
So you have a job. I'm not going to say where it is, but how are you liking it?
I really like my job. I work for a big nonprofit organization and we do a lot of good work. And it's been a good job so far. And I've really enjoyed the stuff that I've been doing.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, it's been around here forever. It's a really good foundation.
Yeah. I was about to try and remember the year, but I'm not a good enough employee to remember the year that we started.
Well, you haven't been there that long.
Yeah, you don't have to know the entire history of a company that you work for. That's okay.
Oh, yeah, but they're such nerds about their history. They're like, oh, yeah, we do all this different stuff. And I'm like, that's cool. I'm not going to pay attention to any of it.
I feel like it because they're kind of wrapped into the Colorado Springs history as it is.
Yeah.
So they've kind of.
And I know a good bit of that, but I just don't remember the exact year that they started doing philanthropic stuff.
Well, plus you and your sister both worked for several summers or for a few summers anyway, as docents at the Pioneers Museum downtown.
Yes, I know a lot about Colorado Springs history.
It's an interesting history. I always like looking at that, like when you go downtown and realizing that the houses along, Cascade, were like all the gold miners' houses so that their families could be down here and their nice little rich houses. I was trying to picture that as like one row of houses so that they could view Pikes Peak. So it's good stuff.
That was a very interesting.
It was a random hiccup. I get random hiccups sometimes,
but it was very delicate and ladylike.
It was. It just kind of switched out.
It's a great part of town to work in because every day I drive to work and I feel so poor. Awesome. It's great.
Is it nearest the Broadmoor? I mean, I've been to a building there that was for them, but I didn't know if that's where.
Yeah, it is.
There you go. If people don't know the Broadmoor, it's like the Richie Rich.
I was telling one of my coworkers where I was moving to, like the area, and she's like, well, isn't that farther away from work than where you live now? And I go, do you really think I could afford to live any closer to here? Because I can't.
I would like $1 million townhome, please.
I'm like, would you like to pay me more? Would you like to pay me more to be able to afford that? Because I mean, I'll take it, but I can't. There's no way.
Wasn't there like a little battle between the Broadmoor and the Antlers or something like that?
Yeah.
Something like that. It was, I would call it a pissing contest, but yeah.
It was there was a lot of angry white guy action back in the day here.
Hence why I said pissing contest.
I'm trying to remember if it was Palmer or somebody else who rode a horse into the Antlers or whatever to be spied. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting history here.
Yes.
Yeah. But it was mostly just really pissy, retired soldiers and
that might have been the guy who rode the horse might have been Spencer Penrose, but I don't remember for sure.
See, that's the thing, because they both had the P names, Palmer and Penrose, and they were both so instrumental. Like, I can't keep it straight anymore.
No.
Every once in a while I dive into it, learn something else.
Well, the Broadmoor's what? 4-star, 5-star hotel.
Bougie.
I would hope it was
Bougie,
5-star.
I don't know if the rating goes to 4 or to 5.
Oh, I don't know.
So it's like Michelin starred restaurants. I'm like, how high up can you go? Can I give them 12? I don't. Have you ever stayed at the Broadmoor?
No,
I haven't either.
Honestly,
Yeah, me either.
I haven't stepped foot in the Broadmoor ever. I've been across the street for a charity gala for the American Cancer Society. But
okay,
I've never been in the Broadmoor.
I hadn't been in the Broadmoor till I started working in that area. And there's the little Cafe Julie in the Broadmoor, which is like their Starbucks, except it costs a million times more.
Yeah.
I've been to that like 2 or 3 times, and there's a FedEx office in the Broadmoor, and I've been to that a couple of times.
I had a friend visiting. She went to some kind of conference that was at the Broadmoor. So I went into the lobby to pick her up.
Yeah.
So we could go out to dinner, but that's the closest.
It's a pretty lobby.
It was. I mean, this was before either you or your sister was born. So imagine.
Yeah, I don't think it's changed much. It's still pretty.
Well, yes, but I'm sure they've redecorated since then. And
No, there's a chance they haven't.
Have you been to the Golden Bee?
Nope.
I haven't either.
Nope. I know everybody's like, you've never been to the Golden Bee? And I'm like, I don't want a yard of beer. Thank you.
No, I did not. I always look at people drinking those thinking, why?
I mean, it's next to this bougie, it just blows my mind. You've got this bougie hotel with their bougie Michelin starred restaurants and stuff. And then you go across the street to the Golden Bee, which is associated with them just by virtue of having been there forever too. Right. And you get a yard of beer. And I'm like, that's so opposite of classy.
Yes. And it's very British. The food in there is very British. And I think it is actually owned by the Broadmoor. And they have I don't know if they still have it, but they used to have a piano player. So that's the big thing. You go and do the sing-alongs. And I'm like, I don't want to sing in public.
It's like the Broadmoor's version of Old Colorado City to Colorado Springs, because we were a dry town. They had the little tunnels and they go to Old Colorado City so they could sin. And and that's like the Golden Bee is for that. You go across the street and act like an ass at the Golden Bee, and that's the Broadmoor's version.
The bougie version of cutting up.
Yeah.
Which is a yard of beer, apparently.
I think they started Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, and there was, don't want to call it a train. Like they had a little tram that went up there or whatever, but before they started the actual zoo up the mountain, because it's at the kind of the bottom of Cheyenne Mountain, and then you go up and there we have our zoo. But like they had a monkey. He had all these animals because he kept getting them and keeping them in the hotel. So there was like a monkey in the hotel, and there was all this other stuff.
Was the monkey running loose in the hotel?
I don't remember. I mean, at least it was in a big space, because I know that the stories I was hearing was that people were like getting shit flung at them by the monkey.
I mean, you'd think they'd at least have the decency to make it wear a diaper. I don't know. Yeah, rich people do weird things.
It wore a diaper.
Well, we can't get much weirder, so.
History. I guess we should dive in.
Let's take a big bite out of cannibalism.
Waka waka.
I'll be there all week.
All right. So I'm starting. Me, Shannon. I'm starting. I'm doing the Siberian Ripper because I wanted to do. Oh man, there were so many. There were so many options. And then I was going to do, I was calling it the Cannibal Compendium. And I was just going to go over all these little stories that there were that you don't really hear about.
So many.
The dude that like on a bus, because this one was fairly recent. I mean, like in the last 10 years, where the dude on the bus like sliced off a dude's head with a sword or something like that, started eating his face and like, But
in the bus window in front of like all the people who evacuated the bus.
Yes. They're just sitting there watching in horror, waiting for like authorities to get there while the dude's on the bus doing this. So, but then I found the Siberian Ripper and I was like, I have to, because you talk about mommy issues.
As many cannibals have.
That's right. And okay, so I'm doing the Siberian Ripper. My sources were Ranker, a YouTube series called Tea and Crime, which is actually quite enjoyable. It's a British guy, but he's from wherever Jason Statham's from, because he had the exact same accent as him. So it's kind of like an accent I expect to hear in a bar, but instead it's Tea and Crime, and he's all proper on there, and it messed with my head.
What's the name of it again?
Tea and Crime.
Tea and Crime. I gotta look for that.
Yeah, he had like video on there and all kinds of things. Murderpedia, Delaney R. Bartlett's blog, LA Times article, Cannibalism, Latest Gruesome Symptom of Russia's Social Ills by Venora Bennett. Alexander Nikolaevich Spezitsev. That's actually why I went and looked at YouTube, because I wanted to know how to pronounce his last name. But from here on out, we will call him Sasha, because that is what many call him. And I'm so grateful to those many. Was born March 1st, 1970 in Kemerovo Oblast in the Soviet Union. It's actually part of Siberia. His low birth weight was a severe concern at the time, but he lived. He was small throughout his life and antisocial, and he was ill a lot, and so he got bullied. His father abandoned them when he was young, which was a relief, actually, because the man was abusive. He was an alcoholic. They didn't have a good life before he left. I couldn't find like when he left. His mom was overprotective, and he slept in the bed with her until he was 12. They did live in a 1-bedroom apartment. He had a sister. Oddly, she didn't sleep in the bed, but he did. Okay. And poured over crime photos, which she shared with him as a child, because she worked for a prosecutor. So she had access to these photos, and she'd steal crime photos and take them home to show her little child. Instead of like reading bedtime stories, that's what they did. That's how they bonded. So sometimes she'd keep the favorites, and they made themselves a little scrapbook. So he said the crime photos stirred something in him. So his sister, Nadezhda, there we go. She was rarely mentioned until really the end. So there's all this stuff about mom spoiling him as a child and all of this stuff, but clearly mom didn't have the same protective feelings toward her. So she moved out at an appropriate age. She had a job. She had her own place. So it would later be found that she knew what her mother and brother were doing. So she didn't take part, although there are claims that she did at one point, but she never reported it. So she'd like come visit, and you're going to find out later what was going on there. And you're going to be like, she just walked into that and then she just left, huh? Okay.
Not my circus, not my monkeys, I guess.
That's right. Exactly. Precisely. Oof. And she worked for a judge. Just throw that out there.
Oh, nice. God.
So he had a Rottweiler, which he walked regularly. So he did end up getting his own place eventually. And that's when he got the dog. On one of his walks, when he was 18, he met a girl named Yevgenia Gosnikova, 17 years old. And he wooed her with flowers and poetry. He spent all this time. And so they started dating. They got really serious. But he started, of course, getting more aggressive and a little bit violent. And then that violence started building. And one day they had a fight, and she broke up with him. And what is the hardest part for people who are abused? Leaving. The most dangerous part, leaving. Yeah, he didn't let her leave. So he was pissed off that she broke up with him, and he took her captive, started beating her, torturing her. He tied her to the radiator, and she was there for about a month with him tormenting and raping and all that good
Nobody
stuff.
was looking for her?
So her parents were, but they didn't know where his apartment was. So ultimately, the police did break into the apartment. And the thing is, so this is going on for a month, and you'd think he lived in an apartment building. But what he'd do is he'd blast his music. And so the neighbors were complaining about the blasting music. Well, the police there were like, we're not doing it. That's a civil issue. Right. You need to deal with that. So most likely he was doing that to cover up the sounds. And this is actually a method he'd use later. So he always lived in apartments. So as he was doing his crimes, he'd blast that music so nobody could hear anybody scream. All right. Her parents were looking for, like I said before, it took that whole month before finally they were able to get the police to go and find out where this guy lived and track him down. And when they broke in, they had to kick the door down. He wouldn't open the door. She was in awful shape. She was covered in burns. She was, of course, beaten, bruised, cut, and she ended up dying of sepsis when they got her to the hospital.
Oh.
So Sasha was put into the Oriole Special Psychiatric Hospital after a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He was also found to have a high IQ, which whoop-de-doo, most of them do. During his time there, he asked another man to insert, this is so weird, a small metal ball into his urethra because he thought it would like, make things better and add some great stuff. Instead, it made it so he couldn't get an erection and he was in pain all the time. And like they mentioned this, and he never went to a doctor or anything, so the ball just stayed there. Just for the record, he just always had the ball there.
How big was the ball?
It had to have been tiny.
I need more details.
Right?
I want to know how big it is and how far.
There was a frustrating thing is this was just thrown out a few times. And then like they kept saying he was an unemployed black marketeer. And I'm like, okay, well, what was he black marketing? And all I could find was that he sold loose cigarettes. So
well, he sold loose cigarettes.
And this will come up later. He was committing these crimes starting in 91. And seriously, in the next paragraph, you're going to find out why. But here's the thing. This was during the collapse of the Soviet Union, just to put a timeline on this. So, okay. Unfortunately for his countless other victims, they released him in 1991 from the psychiatric hospital, but somebody made a mistake and they never removed him from their roles. So it showed him still living there being under care.
Oh.
So the problem with this is that it made sure that he didn't get any follow-up. They weren't following up with him. They weren't checking in on him. Normally he would have been referred to like, an outpatient, continued care, stuff like that. Nothing. And so when police were looking for him, like they were at one point, they started searching for, are there any psychiatric patients who were released in this area? Well, he wasn't going to show up because he wasn't released. So it would later foil police issue, like the police looking for him. Well, for whoever was doing it. So anyway, he started kidnapping homeless children and women from the street. And the thing is, first he friended like some homeless people and he'd go out and he'd drink with them and he'd talk. He loved to philosophize. He was really pissed off about democracy and capitalism trying to come in. Really, it was going toward capitalism there. And he was just, then all of a sudden he decided, well, these homeless people, these are a symptom. This is part of the capitalized, the democracy and all of this stuff. And then he got angry. And so that's why he started going after homeless children, and he would try and pick up homeless women as well. So again, this was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So homeless children and children whose just their parents all had to go to work, both had to go to work. And so they were just running free during the day. The city at this point was Novokuznetsk, and they were just everywhere because the attempts at capitalism there had actually there were coal mines in the area that shut down. There were steel mills. It was a huge steel town, shut down. So all of a sudden there's homeless people. There's people who are working outside the city. There's parents who both have to go to work. So yeah, massive problems with homelessness and all these other issues. I mean, that would be a huge thing to like go into for history, but it left complete, poverty and just abandoned building. It makes me think of what Detroit sounds like, once the car, all that stuff shut down. So anyway, he started luring the kids to his apartment. So the first major incident, and this one, he lured 5 or 6 kids, depending on which story I listened to his apartment. And he said, hey, we're going to burglarize this place. He didn't tell them it was his place. We're going to burglarize this place and then I'll share the money with you. And of course they're like, yeah, money, food, yay. So they're young kids. So they go with him and he actually picks his lock and everything with them there and then gets them inside, locks the door. And remember, he had this giant Rottweiler. The kids get inside and a couple of the stories said that one of the boys screamed. And so Sasha stabs this kid to death. And then he stabs the rest of these kids. They're stuck in here. The Rottweiler's there and he's getting aggressive, probably because they're screaming and there's all this stuff. And so, yeah, he kills all these kids, all these boys. And then he covers them up and he leaves them lying next to his bed for 4 days. And then I assume the reek got too bad or something because he dragged him out into the hallway out of his bedroom. And then his mother comes over and his mother's name is Ludmilla. Ludmilla shows up. She sees these boys lying there and she helps him clean up. That's her response to it. She just goes, all right. And they start cleaning up. And she starts taking the bodies apart, dismembering them. And she uses buckets. And at night, she takes the buckets with the body parts and she works at a school. She had a couple jobs, both for the prosecutor and at a school. And the Abba River is right there. So she starts dumping the bodies in the Abba River. And then she dumped the body parts in lots and stuff like that. And so, well, what happens? Body parts start washing up onto the shore because this is an ongoing thing. And they're like, what's happening? So first, the Directorate of Internal Affairs thought, well, there's organ smugglers. There was a lot of organized crime. There was a lot of black market stuff going on. So they're like, okay, we've got organ smugglers taking out the children. But they didn't really care that much, right? Because it was a bunch of homeless children. They probably saw it as a bit of a scourge too. So, but these groups of children keep disappearing. Little boy parts keep washing up, and the victims in the end would range from age 3. Oh, just think about a 3-year-old homeless child first of all, and then this guy getting him, and to age 20. But the 20-year-olds were women because I couldn't find anything. I don't believe that he sexually assaulted the children. He was just trying to take them out because he saw them as trash, as detritus, as a problem. They were an indication. Okay. The women, though, I know I have to say this later, but I'm just going to throw it in here. Anyway, the women he would pick up and actually try to have sex with them. But because of the ball bearing or whatever it was, he would have problems with that. So the one woman, supposedly in his journal, he said that she laughed at him when he couldn't get it up or whatever. And so then he killed her, which again goes right back to that. This is why women have to let 3 people know where they're going when they go out on a date for the first time. Yep. So anyway, that's why the women are mixed in there. Police became interested in Ludmilla after 3 teenage girls went missing after having been last seen at a store with an older woman who asked for their help to carry groceries. Now, these girls weren't homeless. They were out buying batteries. It was just 3 friends. There was a 15-year-old and I think, 2 13-year-olds. So they're actually, once they heard this, they started thinking, okay, well, she needed help with her groceries. She's within walking distance. So then they knew kind of what apartment building to start looking at. And while they're doing this, of course, again, they're looking up, are there any psychiatric patients? Is there anybody else that we should be worried about about the bodies that were washing up? Nope, there aren't any. None showed up. So since the girls weren't homeless, once their parents realized the girls were missing, they called the police. And there were problems, like the police just didn't give a shit. I imagine that after the fall of the Soviet Union, getting police to give a shit about small issues was probably pretty hard. So
yeah, and if the girls weren't from wealthy families,
and that's exactly it. There was a very specific class system, and so these people, the girls weren't from a higher class. So anyway, police are looking for them. They're narrowing it down. They're honing in on this apartment building. Well, about a month after these girls disappear, a plumbing issue occurs in the apartment building in which Sasha lived. And when the plumber knocked on his door, he denied admittance. He actually said something along the lines of, I'm not well. I'm not mentally well. So my mother has locked me in here. And therefore I am not able to open this door to you because my mom locks it from the outside. And so the plumber's like, what? So he calls the police, of course. And so the police end up having to break in the door. And Sasha, he goes out. He's had his door broken in before and it got him landed in a psychiatric facility. So he goes out onto his balcony, climbs up on the roof, he escapes. And in the meantime, they break in. The apartment absolutely reeks, right? Just human rot. And there in the sofa is 15-year-old Olga Galtseva, and she'd been stabbed repeatedly. Now, some reports said chest and some said her stomach, and actually her abdomen makes more sense because who knows how long that had been festering. That's probably, that would make her last a little longer maybe. And some of the ones that seemed the most trustworthy said she'd been stabbed in the abdomen instead of the chest. And she had a broken arm. They rushed her to the hospital, but she died the next day. She died within 17 hours. Before she died, though, she was able to tell police what had happened while in that month that she was stuck in the apartment, and it was absolutely horrifying. She said that, of course, Ludmilla had asked them to help her carry the groceries, and the girls were like, of course. So they helped carry the groceries. As soon as they get in the door gets shut behind them. There's Sasha. He attacks, and there's the dog, and the dog's barking and all over the place. Sasha comes at them, and one of the girls, Nastya, who was 13, she actually fought back. She hit him back, and that pissed him the fuck off. So he killed her right then, which may make her the lucky one, actually. He attacked her with the knife, stabbed her, and then he brought a rope into it, and he was strangling her. Ultimately, she dies. Well, he ties these two girls to the radiator, and he leaves Nastya's body lying there next to them. And then over the next few days, he's sexually assaulting them. And of course, I'm wondering, with the ball bearing, it never really said, were they raped, or was it, I don't want to say simply, but was it other means of sexual assault? Or was the violence enough to get past the ball bearing? You know what I mean? Like, yes. Maybe it's not so much the ball bearing, but this is how he could get excited. So I don't know. That wasn't findable in what I was looking at. So at one point, he gives the girls a hacksaw, and he says, if you want to live, you will cut your friend up. Oh. So they have to they cut off her limbs and all of that. And then he disembowels her in front of them, and then flushes the organs down the toilet. So we're back to the plumbing problem. Yeah. After, again, assaulting them over and over and over again, he finally kills 13-year-old Xenia. And how he does it is he sicks his dog on her. Dog rips out her throat. Oh,
God.
Yeah. This time, after forcing Olga to dismember Xenia now by herself, Ludmilla shows up, and she cooks up bits of her friends, and they force Olga to eat her friends. In that she would always make soups or stews, or she'd cook up like a steak or something like that. In the bathtub was a torso with no head or limbs. They would later find the head in the water tank that belonged to the entire apartment building, which makes me think of that hotel and that poor girl a human rib cage, just the bone was lying on the carpeting in the living room. The dog was chewing on a human bone. All this, the police walk in, and this is what they see. Like, could you imagine just what the fuckery that was happening there? There was a large amount of bloody clothing. There were over 80 pieces of clothing. There were over 40 pieces of jewelry. And there were Polaroids of naked children tied to the radiator in the apartment, which then I go back to that, and I'm like, was it because he was saving the meat, or was he sexually assaulting the children too?
Or both? No
idea. Sasha made a break for it, of course. So he was out, but they could track where Ludmilla lived. And so she was arrested October 27th, 1996. Sasha would be found on the 30th because he was just kind of huddled in the doorway of his apartment building trying to escape the cold. So they just showed up, and there he was. And they're like, okay, they arrested him. To make it easy on the prosecutors, Sasha had a diary where he'd written about the murders. And of course, that diary hasn't been made public or anything, or we'd have a lot more details. It was there that they discovered he was about his disgust, that this was why he was doing this. He was disgusted by the street children, all that good stuff. It was also found that he and his mother had started cooking portions of the children and eating them, as it was too hard to lug all those body parts to the river. It was just too much work. It was just too much. And because he lived on the 9th floor. So he ended up actually confessing to 19 murders, but police believe he was responsible for up to 80 deaths. And here's the thing, since that matches up with the 80 articles of clothing, I don't know if they actually have an idea of 80 deaths, if they thought that there were the bodies of 80 people that they'd turned up, or what. So I couldn't find any substantiation for that, but it does kind of make sense if it had gotten to the point where they were, because it went for 5 years.
Oh my God.
So he could have done a lot of damage in that time. He was deemed insane and put in the Kamyshin Regional Psychiatric Hospital, sentenced for 4 murders that could be proven after he recanted his confession. They could only make 4 murders stick. His mom was given 15 years in prison, but served 13. She got out in 2008 and moved in with her daughter about 40 miles from where they'd committed their crimes, because she clearly couldn't live in the same city anymore, because they were very notorious for what they'd done. But in the new town, neighbors figured out who they were and actually started posting their actions on social media and spying on them and stuff. And I was like, well, what a shame. Fuck you.
Yep.
I'm glad they made your life a living hell. You killed and ate children and women. I mean, she didn't kill anybody, Ludmilla. And what's funny is there's a video of the two, when they've been arrested, they actually put Ludmilla across from Sasha. And there's video of like this, I don't know, police, whatever, sitting there. And then these two are facing each other and they're arguing because she was claiming, no, I just cleaned up and stuff. And he's saying, you did more than that. And they're arguing in front of the police about how much she was involved. All right. So Sasha is still in prison and he's written books on philosophy and he writes poetry. He considers himself a philosopher. His jailers view him as an intellectual. He doesn't feel at all bad about his crimes, instead pointing out that democracy has killed many more people than he did. He would ultimately earn the nicknames of the Siberian Ripper, the Monster of Novokuznetsk, and others. So I have a post note. In a 1997 LA Times article, it was stated that cannibalism had become almost rampant in small rural towns in Siberia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. A Russian folklorist expert was quoted as saying, in the States, people are trying to move on from the thinking of Sigmund Freud, the idea that people's basic mechanism of interaction is sexual. So an American who wants to express his rage at a society will typically do so through sexually deviant behavior, rape, child abuse, sexual harassment. But here in Russia, what we're all trying to escape from is Marxism. And Marx believed that people always interacted socially as classes or groups. When people here want to find a way to manifest rage against their surroundings, they express their deviance socially. And what could be a purer form of antisocial behavior than eating people? 2 days apart, in August of that year, two separate cannibals were caught in Krasnodar and Kemerovo. In December of that year, a man was convicted of killing and attempting to eat his cellmate in Barnaul. The article also hinted at, his sister's employment for a judge playing a part in her not being charged after the crimes. So even though she actually, before poor Olga died, she said the sister had come to visit, knocked on the door, sat down and had a meal with them and walked back out while the girls were there. So I don't care if she took part in it. She was clearly an accessory, but she worked for a judge. And she wasn't in prison. She wasn't under consideration for anything. They did a psychiatric eval and then let her go. However, this family was considered somewhat more upper class in this class of society, like we talked about before. They were well educated compared to others. One of them worked for a prosecutor, one of them worked for a judge. And so they knew a bit about the law, but they were also a higher class than the people they were attacking. And so, yeah, it sounds like strings were pulled and nothing ever happened to the sister. Cannibalism has been practiced during bad times in Soviet history. Examples include cannibalism during the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 in the Volga region due to a famine, criminals escaping with what they called a cow, which would be a political prisoner they brought with them from the Soviet gulags so they could eat them if they couldn't find other food, or as they said, hit hard times. And the notorious cases in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, in World War II, where the townspeople were trapped within city limits for 3 years by the Nazi army who had occupied and surrounded them. They wouldn't allow food in. 3 years is a long time. So to me, I was thinking perhaps with these historical incidents and the fact that it's had to happen, maybe that lessened the cultural disgust with which people see cannibalism there compared to, say, Americans who haven't typically been put in such straits that they've had to eat each other, except for, of course, we're going to talk about the Donner Party. I mean, but that's compared to like Russia's history. That's one incident. And people talk about it as a this is terrible, eat grass. That just struck me as interesting. But I want to point out one more time, the Spezitsevs were never starving.
No.
So
wow.
I think it's really funny that you said that the other inmates thought of him as like a philosopher because he's going on about all this. He had a metal ball in his urethra. He can't have been that smart.
He's not that smart.
He never thought to go to a doctor of, hey, so I have this ball jammed in my urethra that's causing me some problems. Never once thought of doing that.
No, he just had to kill women because of it. Like this ball in my urethra is making me angry. And clearly that is the fault of women.
Well, I can understand it making him irritable.
Well, yeah.
Especially if it was metal, did it rust? That's what I want to know.
I mean, even if it rusted or not, it's going to be irritating your body for forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised, wouldn't he have had infections and just...
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't
So,
say
like,
that, but
glad to see a high IQ at work, Mr. Metal Ball in the urethra. Good God.
oh my gosh. Yeah.
I'm going to start calling people I don't like that. Hello there, Mr. Metal Ball in your urethra.
I think you're like, you're gonna be exactly like.
And he just left it there. He didn't ever once think, I should really get this removed.
I'm just really puzzled about the process. Like, what did they use to push this up his urethra? And what did the guard walk by at any point, or a doctor, orderly, or whatever, and go see two guys sitting huddled together on the bed or the floor with one of them holding the other one and just shoving something up that like
an old
just a
muzzle
little
loader.
yeah, that's what I mean. Just this some sort of pole.
Now, what did he have it
so like
inserted?
you could put your I don't.
It was.
I mean, like a pen. Like you could take the ink thing from a pen, maybe.
Although we're saying this like you can't fit wider in there, and you can. Because there are stories about all kinds.
Yes, there are.
To have it inserted far enough that it doesn't just come out.
Right.
I'm like, really? Did he have a coat hanger?
It's like the Princess and the Pea. You know?
There are a lot of... I imagine that any fan listening to this right now is going, ew!
They've got their legs crossed.
You can just like, oh,
it's awful.
All right, Nikki, what you got for us?
All right. So the Donner Party. The year was 1846. The Mexican-American War was declared. Elias Howe patented the first sewing machine, and the Liberty Bell cracked while being rung for George Washington's birthday. And around this time, thousands and thousands of immigrants/migrants, depending on who you ask, are heading west to fulfill manifest destiny to settle the quote-unquote untamed wilds of the United States, because obviously there wasn't anybody there already.
No, not at all. Nobody there.
No. Included in these immigrants, there is a very famous and ill-fated group, the Donner Party. And the Donner Party actually in the time was referred to as the Donner-Reed Party. And there's some interesting perceptions on what the Donner Party was and what exactly happened. Because we see a lot of references to them in media today, like, oh, it was this family that got stuck in the mountains and they ate each other. Like, that's kind of the base knowledge that everybody has of the Donner Party. That's what you think of at first.
But then there's more.
There's so much more. It is so much worse than you initially think. So the Donner Party, or the Donner-Reed Party, started in Independence, Missouri, and they made some very critical errors which led to their inevitable demise. And the first of which was they followed some really, really bad advice. So before I get into the bad advice, I really quickly want to talk about who the Donner Party was, because it's a lot more people than people think it was. It was 87 people.
Oh, wow.
So it was...
I think it was,
like 10.
10.
No. So you had George Donner and Jacob Donner. They were brothers. They brought their wives, Tamsin and Elizabeth, and all of their lots and lots of children. They had teamsters to run their oxen carts. There was James Reed and his wife, Margaret, and their children, Mr. Reed's daughter from a previous marriage, and Mrs. Reed's mother, who was actually the first to die on the trail, but that was like a week in. She was like 80 years old. It happens. The Reeds brought 5 employees. The Breen family, consisting of Patrick Breen, his wife Peggy, and their 7 children also came. William Eddy came with his wife and their abundance of children. Lavina Jackson Murphy came with her 7 children as a widow, and her children's spouses and families came as well. And there were some smaller families that joined the party and some individuals, notably Charles Stanton, who joined the Donners by himself. He was a big part in them getting rescued inevitably. So it was a lot of people, and like over half of them were children. So I think that's pretty important to bring up. So there was this guy named Lansford Hastings, and he came out with a book that a lot of immigrants used to plan their travels safely across the trail, the Oregon Trail or the California Trail. They called it a lot of different things. And it suggested leaving late enough in the year for there to be grass for oxen, but early enough to not encounter the horrifically harsh winters in the mountains, because you'd get trapped and die. And even though there was a lot of exploration west during this period, there was still a lot of misinformation going around. And this was even prior to the internet. There were still idiots running their mouths who had no idea what they were talking about, but wouldn't shut up anyway. And sadly, the Donners fell prey to some of that misinformation. They left way too late in the year. So they left about May 17th is when they first left Independence. And really, according to Lansford Hastings, you should be leaving before May. Like you should be leaving in April. And they didn't. And they decided on an untested path suggested by a man who had only ever seen the trail on maps. Funnily enough, who was that man? Also, Lansford Hastings. So the Hastings cutoff is actually what splintered the considerably larger group that the Donner-Reed Party was a part of into the Donner-Reed Party. So they decided to take the cutoff, and the rest continued down the traditional trail, like the established trail, on July 31st. So Hastings made this claim about this cutoff, and it's suspected that he was making these claims because a friend of his had land in California, and he would be getting money if there were settlers who came and bought that land. So he claimed that this route would shave over 300 miles off of the journey to California. And that is a lot when you are walking by foot with 60 children. I wouldn't want to be going by foot any longer than I had to. So these 87 members of the party split off, and they took the route over the Great Salt Lake Desert through horrible heat and windstorms, which kicked up sand. They got lost. They lost oxen. They wasted a ton of time trying to find the oxen that wandered off during sandstorms. So they lost oxen and supplies and a lot of time. This trip over the desert, Hastings estimated at 2 days. It took 5 plus the extra time they wasted looking for oxen. So the cutoff that these men and women believed so much in that they risked their lives added over 100 miles to the trip and added a month of time, which was not ideal considering the fact that they were about to head into the Sierra Nevada mountains. They had been warned to not take the cutoff by a lot of people along the way, I want to add, including by Hastings. He had met up with them and they got to the trail and he went, wow, this sure looks too narrow to bring wagons across. I'm going to head out.
They're like, we're just going to forge right on.
Yep, they kept on going. And don't get me wrong, they weren't blindly like, hoo-dee-doo, yay, things are going great. There were a lot of tensions going on in the group. And in fact, shortly before they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains, tensions ran a little too high and they snapped. And James Reed fought with a teamster and ended up stabbing him to death in the altercation. And his punishment for this was he was banished from the party. And his family stayed in the party without him, which he begged them to do. He was like, no, please just stay. Go west. I'll meet you out there. It'll be fine. It'll be great. It'll be fine. So he continued on west by himself. And funnily enough, he made it to California.
Yeah.
So when the migrants got to the Sierra Nevada mountains, it was October, which is way later in the year than advised. And also that meant there wouldn't be people coming after them for months.
Well, and just to be clear to people who don't live anywhere near mountains, we get snowstorms in June and and September, and I'm sure July and August, if I looked there historically, it's happened. You can get random snowstorms. I've seen it driving across Wyoming as well in the middle of June. So yeah, if people don't realize you can actually hit that weather pretty early and pretty late, but then there in October, we're already getting real actual snow.
Oh yeah.
In the mountains.
So they get to the mountains and the snow is already there and it's only getting deeper and they're low on food, they're low on oxen, and they've been forced to abandon virtually all of their possessions. Margaret Reed, James Reed's wife, actually really wanted to start a school in California. So in their wagon, she had this little organ. She had all these books. She was so excited, had to abandon all of it. She lost all of her possessions. It was really sad. And so the second big, awful thing that, to be fair, the Donners were not in control of is a thing called the Pineapple Express, or the Madden-Julian Oscillation, which is where cold air sucks up moist, warm air, and rain and snow dump down in apocalyptic proportions onto the West Coast, including the Sierra Nevada mountains, which during the time that the Donners were there were over 20 feet of snow. Yeah. It was Apocalyptic is a really good adjective for this. And so the Donners got trapped. The Donner Reed party was trapped in what is now called Donner Pass. And things don't get named after you unless something really good happens or something real tragic happens.
Yep.
So trapped, they decided to build ramshackle cabins in tents to try and survive the winter. The Donners themselves, George and Tamsin and Jacob and his wife Elizabeth, they actually were further back on the trail because a wagon axle broke. So they didn't have the opportunity to brace against anything. They were very out in the open in a tent. That is all that the Donners themselves had. And the rest of the party made it not that much further, maybe 5 miles further, where they built cabins against these rocks, some rock formations, which was probably the smartest thing they could have done. But so three cabins were built. They were excruciating to build because these were people who were eating their jackets to survive. They had to eat the things that kept them warm to not starve to death. And then they were starting to freeze to death. No one had shoes anymore because they had to eat them or they got worn out on the awful rocks and all the snow. And the first recorded death at these camps was Bayless Williams, who passed away from malnutrition. And that was as recorded in Patrick Breen's diary. There were a lot more deaths to follow. So the first written mention of the idea of cannibalism came on December 24th, 1846, because Merry Christmas, let's eat somebody. Patrick Dolan proposed casting lots to see who should be sacrificed as food in basically a draw straws, because, you know, that's the fairest way to do it. The idea was immediately shot down. But then during the night, Mr. Graves and, funnily enough, Mr. Dolan died in the night. Their companions were so desperate that they ate their bodies for sustenance. So
I find that fair.
I mean, if you're the guy who says, let's start eating people and you die, you're not allowed to be mad if people eat you.
Yeah. Let's eat, Grandma.
You don't even get to.
Traumas are important. So on December 16th, actually, a party of 15 people set across the mountains in an attempt to snowshoe their way to help. So this is called the Snowshoe Party, and their camp is eventually called the Camp Forlorn Hope. Oh. So they had 2 native guides who had initially been helping the party and were helping the Snowshoe Party. And they ran away from these people, from the Snowshoe Party, because it's like, wow, these folks sure are eating people.
They were like, white folks be doing weird shit again.
The white people are eating each other. Let's bounce. I do not blame them. But unfortunately, the Snowshoe Party came across these guides while they were sleeping in the night at one point, and it's never written down officially that they murdered them. However, more than likely, they murdered these 2 sleeping men and ate them. So the party of 15 that initially set out across the mountains, only 7 survived, 2 men, and all 5 of the women who set out actually survived. Because apparently you can't eat them, I guess.
That's interesting, because women have a higher fat content, like, you know, just compared to men, and therefore they probably, it's like eating seal blubber in Alaska.
That's actually why more women survived this ordeal than men, because of that higher body fat content.
Right, because their bodies could just start digesting that and like processing that instead.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually a really cool thing to bring up. So the 7 that survived, they did get to Sacramento Valley and they did get help. Funnily enough, James Reed was just kind of chilling in California and he heard about the people trapped in the mountains and went, oh yeah, my wife is one of those people and so are my children. So he joined the parties to go get help. So in the main camp, where around at the time was called Truckee Lake and is now called Donner Lake, cannibalism also did occur. There are lots of records of cannibalism happening. Parents used their dying breaths to beg their children to consume their flesh to survive. So the rescue parties that did come, there were 3 or 4. They could only take a few people at a time due to snowy conditions, injuries, and other things. And I just want to say, if you ever want to talk about the dedication of a wife to her husband, you got to talk about Tamsin Donner, because her husband, George, was dying. There was no way he was going to survive this ordeal because he got hurt when the wagon axle broke. He was in no condition to be moved. She was fit enough. She was well enough to go, but she said, no, take my children. I'm staying with my husband. I don't care. And she died along with him. So he died and she just sat there and starved to death. I'm like, that is for better or worse, very literally.
I don't know. Once he's dead, I think your obligations are done.
So he died and she tried to make her way to the rest of the cabins and she got there. She did get there. She walked the 5 miles to the other camps and then perished there. So she not only was starving to death after her husband died, she walked through blizzards for 5 miles and then died.
She should have had him.
She should have had him. She really, really should have. So there were several parties that came to rescue people. They took children first. That was the biggest priority, was children and anyone who wasn't too badly hurt. Several people died on the way back to California once they had been rescued. It was tragic. One kid, I don't have his name written down, but one boy, I think he was maybe 12 years old. He got rescued. He got to help, but he overate so much and so quickly that it killed him.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And that is the worst way to go. You've been starving to death for weeks and months. And what finally gets you is you ate too much.
Eating.
Yeah, that one's like a little, I mean, the whole thing is upsetting, obviously, but like that one especially is really upsetting. Yeah. So the final party that went out, they had left maybe 4 or 5 people left at the rescue party before. The final one that came found one survivor. That would be Louis Kesberg, who very famously openly admitted to cannibalism as he was found eating stew made from human flesh.
Well, you know.
They're like, what you eating there, bud? And he's like, people. That's maybe not the exact quote, but it was something along those lines of
Patriot.
Well, you see, it's this delightful recipe of heart. Booze, don't worry about it. So they get Louis Kesberg out, and everyone's out of the mountains finally. 42 of the 87 members of the Donner Party died in Donner Pass. And despite this, members of the Donner Party still encouraged others to travel west. They had to eat their parents. They had, like, of the original 87, most survivors were children, partially because of the percentage they made up of the group and partially because of the sacrifices older adults had made. Virginia Reed, the daughter of James Reed, wrote, I have not wrote you half of the trouble, but I have wrote you enough to let you know what trouble is. Don't let this letter dishasten anybody. Never take no cutoffs and hurry along as fast as you can. So basically, yeah, don't do what we did, but do what we did. Come here. It's fine. It's great.
California's spectacular.
It's like someone who got their leg bit off by a shark being like, beach is safe. Don't worry about it.
Swimming is fun.
Yeah, it's a great time. Splish splash. It's all good. So with the gold rush in 1848, the Donner's Tale was less regarded as a cautionary tale and more of just a grim footnote. And at the time, in the time when when all these people were rescued and all of this is going on, the news went nuts. Everyone was writing about cannibalism. They wrote about a woman eating the still beating heart from her husband's corpse, which obviously never really happened, but it made for great news. And you can go online and read the diaries that we still have of the survivors and of some of the people who perished. And some of it needs to be taken with a grain of salt because of the bias of writing. And mind you, everyone is starving and everyone is losing their minds. But it's just incredible to read because of the decision making that happened and like the desperation. And these people were desperate. They ate their shoes before they thought about eating each other. But it was survival cannibalism at its most basic form of there is nothing else you can do. Their oxen either died or wandered off. During some of the intense snowfall, a bunch of oxen wandered off. So it's like, wow, well, we don't have cows anymore. Where's Grandpa?
Well, here's the thing. One of the things that I've heard about it that started becoming increasingly more information about it, though, was that, and I don't know what the tribe would have been, what community would have been in the Sierra Nevadas, but supposedly they were approached by natives in the area who offered them food, and they were so biased against them that they were like, nah.
To be fair,
we're okay.
There is some record of that, but also they had some reason to be hesitant because they had been attacked prior to this happening. A group of natives had attacked them at one point much earlier along in the trail when they were still part of the larger party. And that seeded their mistrust. They went, no, we've done this before. We're not doing it again. We're not trusting anybody other than ourselves.
We're going to continue trespassing. We're not going to learn from the original people who got us because we are trespassing. But when they offer us food, by God, we're not going to take it.
They were just like, maybe not. And which tribe it was is actually a little bit contested on which specific one it was, which is why I went with more vague terms, because it was thought that it was known and now it's contested and no one's quite sure. And I don't have access to all the primary sources. I did have access to some, but they were written by the Donner Reed Party, who didn't know jack shit.
Yeah. It's always a classic. The Donner Party. Everybody,
So,
I'm just gonna throw out a movie recommendation right here, and it's Ravenous. If anybody has not seen Ravenous, it is the best cannibalism movie ever in the world. It's hysterical.
The funny thing, a big reason why I started looking into the Donner Party was because I had to do a media review for one of my classes. And I can suggest 2 movies to never ever watch if you want to have a good time, because they are so dreadfully bad. I invited my boyfriend at the time over. I'm like, I have to watch these movies to do a media review about the Donner Party. It'll be fun. Why don't you come over and watch? Halfway through the first one, he's like, why are we doing this again? He's like, can we watch Paint Dry instead? They were just so bad. One was just called The Donner Party, and one was called One More Mountain, 1846 Donner Reed Party Drama. They were both. The first one was more modern, and it was just bad. It was written supposed to be like a suspense horror type situation, but it was just bad historically and thematically, and the writing was bad. And then the other one is a much older made for TV documentary from like the 80s. So they can't talk about gruesome cannibalism because it's the 80s apparently. So it ignores the majority of the issue. They're both just really boring.
How can you talk about the Donners without talking about cannibalism?
Because TV censorship was a thing.
And when they got hungry, they made unfortunate choices. Moving on.
The dramatization, it's like they're eating. They don't even talk about the Donners in the TV, in the documentary One More Mountain. They really just follow Margaret Reed and her being a rich white lady who struggled a little bit and ate some shoes.
No, Ravenous is a horror comedy, and it is the most phenomenal movie ever, and everybody has to watch it once. It wraps in Wendigo too. No, it's not. You're not going to watch him eating people.
Shannon just looked at the look on my face,
right.
and I'm like,
tomato face.
I don't know.
No, it's spectacular. There's at one point, there's a poor guy who's wounded, and he's in the tent, and with a certain someone, I'm not going to say who, and you just hear, he's licking me.
The mom and me would cope. But did you die?
Maybe eventually.
But if you can yell, you're not dead yet.
It's true.
Wow.
It's your turn.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring cannibalism. I thought I was because I thought you were doing an older piece. I thought I'm going to bring cannibalism into the present day, but I'm not, because you did. So Shannon and I have been discussing cannibalism off and on since we decided to do this. So I wanted to just give a definition, because cannibalism is the act of consuming another individual of the same species as food.
So it is cannibalism when another animal eats an animal in its own species.
Yes. And the cool word for it is I can't say it.
Yeah.
Anthropophagy.
Yum. Because what Faji is for the eating part.
So I got to tell you, my sources were, of course, Wikipedia. Of course, you can't do anything these days. However, there's also a piece on Reddit, which we'll get to shortly. There's an article called "In Defense of Cannibalism" by J. Jeremy Wisniewski in the July 2004 Public Affairs Quarterly. I have to recommend that article. If you are at all interested in the topic of cannibalism, I'm going to talk about the article itself in a second. I could have just read his article. It was it's interesting. It's got a little bit of humor in it, and it's not so scholarly that you can't read it. It's not one of those dry things, but it was really fascinating. And then there was the Vox website. So the Defense of Cannibalism article removes the religious and cultural bias.
Well, but that's, because I've made it clear that I feel that if you're in a situation that you have to, then why is eating another human? Now, the murder part is the bad part. But to me, if they're dead and you're hungry,
exactly,
fucking eat them. Get over it. Jesus Christ.
If it's that or die, I mean...
Because see, we've had these discussions.
Yes,
and he already knows where I stand on it.
And here's the thing: most people say, if you're in that situation, it's okay.
I feel like the whole Andy's thing and the movie getting made of the people who were in that plane wreck and stuff started softening that a little bit culturally and societally, because people were like, "Well, I get why they had to do it."
Exactly. They were trying to differentiate between the consequences of cannibalism and the act of cannibalism itself.
Okay.
So, and I got to give bonus points to this author because he made a Soylent Green joke. So most Westerners would say it was wrong, but under certain dire circumstances, it's permissible.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's, what we talked about with the Donner Party. There were utilitarian arguments and the Kantian arguments in the article. The article concludes that the moral prohibition against cannibalism is not rationally justified.
No.
However, it is pretty much universally accepted that to kill someone for the purpose of eating them is wrong.
Yeah.
Eating them may or may not be wrong, but killing them to eat them is definitely wrong.
Correct. But I'm not going to lie and say if I were in a situation where we were starving to death and we'd eaten all our clothes, that I wouldn't pick out the sickest member and end them.
And help them along.
Listen, I actually have super strong ethics in other places, but morally and ethically there, if I'm going to die and this person's already dying,
I mean, if it's a mercy killing, that's more understandable than if you just murdered whoever for why ever. If you're like, well, they're already sick, they're already hurt, they're gonna die anyway. That's, to me, more ethical than I'm just gonna draw straws and kill somebody.
Like the guy in Siberia.
Yeah.
The slasher.
I might eyeball somebody who looks super tasty after a while too, though. Again, I try not to make definitive statements on what I would or would not do if my life were at risk.
So here's something interesting. Cannibalism isn't actually illegal in the US. There aren't actually specific laws prohibiting it. However, obtaining the flesh to eat usually is.
Right. Like it's basically, it's a crime to murder somebody. It's a crime to grave rob. It's steal bodies.
And that was another thing the article talked about was the idea of desecrating a corpse.
Yeah.
Because but then the whole point was they're dead. They have no rights. Mm-hmm. They have no dignity.
Yeah.
So what can you take away from a dead body? You can't take anything away from it.
Right. But there is a charge of death.
Yes.
So that basically to me says cannibalism, no bueno.
In 1933 in the Ukraine, it was funny because you were talking about the Soviet Union earlier.
Yeah.
In 1933 Ukraine, the famine was so severe that cannibalism was common enough that the state had to set up anti-cannibalism squads to arrest people for eating their neighbors or family members.
Right. Like with the St. Petersburg thing, the thing that caught my attention was like the children were first because you could make more.
I
mean,
that's true, but
let's talk about a country that drowned their daughters because you could only have one child for a while there, and the boys had more value. Children are expendable.
And I know that Donner Party aside, people like to think cannibalism is something that can't happen here, but there is evidence of cannibalism in colonial Jamestown.
Yeah.
In the early 1600s. So it's like, yeah, it can happen here.
My cannibalism compendium would have said different.
So here's the thing a lot of people don't know. From the 1600s to the 1800s, executioners often had a side gig selling off body parts. So body fat in particular, but also flesh and bones. So the components were used to concoct a wide variety of treatments for everything from arthritis to epilepsy. Body fat was a very big.
Fat is super valuable.
Yes. Apparently, no matter what the source.
Yep.
Is that a good fat or a bad fat? Is that like an avocado?
Is it going to be high cholesterol or no?
That's a good question.
Take my adipose tissue, please.
So the four people, and I hope it's pronounced four, it's spelled F-O-R-E. There was no accent, so I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. In Papua New Guinea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They're like the big one.
Yeah. They ate bodies of relatives to cleanse their souls as late as the 1950s. So thousands of them contracted kuru, which is similar to mad cow disease. That's the shorthand way to describe it. But some of them developed a genetic mutation that made them immune to the prions that transmit kuru. So they evolved to be able to eat people.
Yeah, we evolve. Living creatures evolve pretty fast sometimes.
Yes, they do. So we're talking about cannibalism, but then there's also self or auto-cannibalism, which is the practice of eating oneself. So if you've ever cut your finger and licked the blood or bit off
you're a cannibal.
You're a cannibal. You're an auto-cannibal. Scab eaters, the whole thing. And some people, so it can get more extreme because we're human beings, we're curious creatures, and occasionally some of us take PCP and bite off and swallow a finger.
That's right. There's a famous PCP case, by the way, from Florida. It turned out when they tested him, there was no PCP. He just leaped on a homeless man on the street and started eating his face off. The man lost, I think, 70% of his face or something. It was in the news. I remember it being big. And they were saying it was PCP at the time, or bath salts. Sorry, they were saying it was bath salts.
Oh, right.
When they tested him, it sure wasn't, but they never determined why he did it.
So he just ate a dude's face to eat a dude's face.
He just violently attacked a man on the street and ate his face to eat a man's face. Yeah.
What an asshole.
Well,
that was news to me though, that when they tested him, there was no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't hear about that. I mean, I've heard about the case. I had never heard. Yeah.
So,
man, what a dick.
Have you guys heard about Andre Thomas?
Tell us that.
Yes, I have.
Oh, I know, right?
Convicted murderer and death row inmate Andre Thomas removed his right eye in 2004 after murdering his wife and children. He did not eat it.
Was it like that sin thing, remove the eye?
However, wait for it. In 2008, he removed his left eye and he did eat that one.
Oh.
You can only eat the left one.
Bothering him, this missed opportunity for so long.
He was out of balance.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I mean, I'd be curious what the texture was like too, surely.
Really, with an eye, yeah.
I can't imagine.
Or did he a weird texture?
That bite and it just popped and squirted into his mouth?
I do not know. It did not say. As far as I know, no one has.
Really, because I found a whole article that spoke to various cannibals and asked them how it tasted.
Oh, well, yeah, I've seen
that. Getting there. So there's the other case of, it's not a case, it's oh my God, and it's getting popular again. Women eating their placenta after childbirth.
You looked that up because I told you about it though.
Because we were talking about,
because I have friends who did it.
Because I said, is that cannibalism? Yes, it is. It's autocannibalism.
It's a body part.
It's also referred to as placentophagy.
Gross.
Some hospitals will let you have your placenta, some will not.
It's supposed to be very nourishing.
But it came out of your own body, so why shouldn't you be able to claim it and do what you want with it? However,
it's medical waste and yada yada.
But no, it's a slippery slope, whether it is autocannibalism or cannibalism, because the placenta is formed from cells from the fetus, not cells from the mom. So you're actually eating cells that were formed by your child. So it is, in fact, cannibalism.
There you go.
And it's just trendy again.
It's gross.
Was a mom who bit into her baby after she was handed the baby after she had it in the hospital, and the doctors had to like wrench her mouth open and take the baby away from her. You're welcome.
Ew.
I have so many random cannibalism facts after reading through all this stuff and changing my stories multiple times.
So now we're gonna get to my favorite current, recent, we'll say, cannibalism story. So this is all written up on Reddit. So love it or hate Reddit. The Reddit user goes by the name Incredibly Shiny Shart. He was,
as one does.
It sounds trustworthy.
Yes. So he was involved in an accident and a portion of his lower leg had to be amputated. This was in 2016. So this was not that long ago. He took home what was amputated. He said to them, "That's mine. I want it." So his very first idea was going to be to taxidermy the piece of his leg and foot that had been cut off. But apparently, for whatever reason, that was not feasible. So he called up some friends and said, "Remember that time we were talking about wondering what human flesh would taste like?" So, which was informed consent, I would assume. So they cooked up his foot and made tacos out of it. And if you want to, I will post the link for this. You could go to Reddit and read this. And people asked him all kinds of questions. Did it taste like chicken? The answer is no, it did not.
Pork.
The story, and it's fascinating because it's in his own words on Reddit, and he patiently answers a ton of questions, even when they're asked over and over again, while fending off people asserting with righteous indignation that he is a disgusting human being and will burn in hell for this.
Why?
It's his leg. He can do what he wants with it.
That is his point. It was my leg.
Is this addressed in the Bible?
Not to my knowledge, but I am
Did
not.
God ever say this guy from Reddit can't eat his own foot?
I don't know.
He said it tasted good, and what was left afterward was cremated, and he has the remains in a jar.
I mean, I just want to point out that we have a friend who wants us to or is it you?
It is not me.
Put her ashes in a pipe and smoke them.
She wants us to smoke her. And I flat out told her I'm not going to.
No.
I stopped smoking in my 20s, to be clear. So.
But people asked him all kinds of questions. Somebody said, if you had to amputate your other leg, would you eat that one? And
why not?
And he said, I hope to hell I never have to be in that situation. But yes. Well, would you have done it if it had been your arm that was amputated? He's like, yes, the whole point is it was my flesh to do with as I wanted. People are like, you're going to die. You're going to get this prion disease and you're going to die. And he's like, sorry, that's if you eat brains. I did not eat my brain. I ate my foot.
He still has his brain. He's still using it.
He appears to be. I mean, and people were just asking stupid questions like, what did it look like? He's like, it looked like red meat.
Yeah.
And there are pictures on Reddit. I'm just going to say, I did not go into this topic with the amount of glee my two compatriots here did. And I did not look at the pictures.
Oh, there's a picture of the torso from the story I did in the tub.
Obviously there weren't Donner Party pictures, but I will say I'm the one who suggested this case to you. Yeah. I have seen the pictures. It does just look like red meat. It's not that weird.
I get that, but I was just like,
I'm not saying it's not weird in that, like, it's fine to look at. I'm just saying, like, I've looked at it. It does. He's right. It does just look like red meat. But I get being wigged out by not wanting to look at that because it is people. But it just looks like meat.
I appreciated the fact that it was blurred out. So,
yes.
because what I hate on Facebook, and I have had to unfriend people, is you're flipping along through your Facebook feed and all of a sudden you come across animal torture pictures, close-up animal torture photos.
Or videos.
And they're like, or videos, and they're like, isn't this horrible? We need to do so. And I'm like, no, I you can't throw that in my face with no warning. I can't look at that. Or the people who post, what was the other thing? Oh, people who fall down or whatever and post close-up of their bleeding wounds and their
yeah, it's gross. It's so gross.
People who do that or who post dead animals that they've killed. Like a big one that I kept seeing was somebody was having a rattlesnake problem, and snakes just look so pitiful when they're dead because that whole muscular body is suddenly limp.
Yeah,
and I'm like, I don't want to see the animals you killed. I don't. Good for you that you felt that you needed to murder the snakes. I hope you get overrun with mice. But please stop posting the pictures without warning us. Put it in the comments. Put it in
exactly.
Put a thing.
Or if someone asks, wait for someone to ask.
Yes. So, but yeah, it's one of those. That's why I don't post the worst pictures from the stories we do, because I feel people don't want to accidentally come across something like that with no warning. You're not prepared for it. You may not be, and so, but I'll say in the stories, you can look up the pictures if you want to, these exist. And then it's easy for them to go and look it up.
Yes. Yeah. And it is very easy to find these images. Cause I remember one of the first true crime stories I got into was the Black Dahlia.
Yeah.
I was not prepared to see the picture of Elizabeth Short, but I sure saw it.
Yeah.
And it was unpleasant.
Terrible. Yeah. It's nasty. So yeah, I try not to. I mean, like, you're basically just traumatizing people without their permission.
Yeah. On a forum that's puppies and kittens. And here's what I ate for dinner last night.
Yeah.
And look at my giant gaping wound.
Buy my book. Here's my wound. Notice the maggots in it. Like, no.
I'm like,
post it.
Yeah. Well, that and funeral pictures. Funeral pictures are gross. Like, I worked at a funeral home. I can deal with that stuff, but it's like, I don't want to see that when I'm not braced for it mentally.
Right. Like, if I go and look for true crime pictures, I am prepared to do so. And I am a person who will want to see, out of curiosity, the things they're talking about. So I have the visual to replace my made up visual.
Well, I got in an argument with someone once when I worked at the Independent, because there was a zine in town that wanted to insert, they were paying. Don't get me wrong. This wasn't something that the Independent produced. They were paid to insert this little magazine in the Independent. I'm like, fine. That I have no problem with. E-commerce, it's a good thing. Except the cover of this magazine was a picture of a dead girl. Now, it wasn't a horribly graphic, but she was dead. And she was, I want to say, a young teenager. She was like 13 or maybe 15. And somebody's like, well, she's been dead for a long time. Why do you care? And I'm like, she did not give permission for some asshole to put her picture on the cover of a paper just to sell copies.
Yeah.
That to me,
but we do that
wrong.
all the time. That's journalism.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And just using a passed away person's photo. There was a TikToker who got some flack because she was posting videos and footage from her baby's funeral because she's trying to drum up publicity of something awful was done to my child and she passed away. But like, seeing a dead infant is intensely upsetting and traumatizing, even for people who are used to that kind of thing. But it's like that baby never had the ability to give consent in the first place, and you as its mother should never have done that. Like, it's just awful.
I'm like, you're just, and to me, it's a different story if she's trying to raise some kind of awareness. I'm not saying that it was right. But other than just simple, straightforward, nobody knew or was related to or had any idea what this girl's story was. We're just using the image because it's cool and it's edgy.
Yeah.
God forbid if things aren't edgy.
The Oklahoma City bombing and the baby, the fireman carrying the bloodied baby or whatever.
Yep.
But again, journalism puts out what's going to draw attention.
If it bleeds, it leads. There's a reason that's a saying.
Yeah. Oh, that's a saying.
Oh yeah.
Thanks. I hate it.
Yep. There's a song. Is it Glenn Fry or is it the Eagles? Dirty Laundry.
Oh, I don't know.
Isn't that the one where they talk about, see it on the evening news?
I don't remember.
The guys in the newsroom have a running bet, get the widow on the set.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's classy.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're singing it, condoning it, but yeah.
Ugh.
Look it up.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in for What's Eating You. Check out our social media.
Thank you to Nikki for suggesting this cutely morbid topic.
Cutely morbid.
I was working so hard on my Donner Party paper and researching so much. Also, I forgot to list my sources, and I'm really sorry. Do you want me to list those real quick?
Yeah. Yes.
The Encyclopedia Britannica. There's a website compiled by Daniel M. Rosen called the Donner Party Diary, where he compiles several of the diaries from the members of the Donner Party. He divvies them down into months and talks about their flaws and benefits. I use that as a primary source from the diaries and secondary source from his interpretation. Caitlin Doty on YouTube was a huge inspiration for all of this, as well as much later on, Puppet History Theater. I loved their video about the Donner Party. It didn't really teach me anything new, but it's awesome, and I always want to shout it out.
I love
as well as, I have it written down. Let me go look. The Donner Party. Oh, where is it? Epidemiology of Disaster, The Donner Party by S.A. McCurdy, and Unfortunate Immigrants, Narratives of the Donner Party by Kay Johnson.
Groovy.
Nicely done.
All right.
I went to college. I learned a lot about research.
See, I was researching all this shit isn't because of my college. All this shit I know is just because I have an insatiable need to learn shit.
I mean, I took a class called American Deathscapes. I learned a lot of shit.
Nice.
All right. Well, I guess thank you for joining us.
Thank you for suggesting and joining.
Thank you for finally succumbing to me asking again and again and again if you'll let me do this.
And we will talk to everyone later.
We will. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back next week with more shenanigans.